Amara had not slept well in 3 years. That was not a complaint she ever said out loud, because she was not the kind of person who said things like that. She simply carried it, the same way she carried everything else, quietly, without drawing attention to it, without asking anyone to notice. People rarely did notice, and on the occasions when they did, they usually mistook her silence for contentment, her stillness for peace. She had stopped correcting them a long time ago. She lived in a second-floor apartment in a mid-sized city that was not remarkable in any particular way. The building had 12 units. She knew the names of 4 of her neighbors, and she liked 2 of them. The apartment itself was small but well kept. She had arranged it carefully over the course of 2 years, the bookshelves organized not by author or title but by some system that only made sense to her. The kitchen stocked with things she actually used. The single window above the sink facing east, so the light came through in the morning while she made coffee. She had built the space around herself the way a person builds around a wound, covering it without touching it directly. It was comfortable. It was hers. She worked at a mid-level logistics company as an operations coordinator. The job was not glamorous, but she was very good at it, and being good at something unglamorous had its own quiet satisfaction. She managed shipment timelines, resolved supplier conflicts, tracked inventory discrepancies across 3 warehouses in 2 different states. She had been offered a promotion twice. Both times she had accepted without celebration, returned to her desk, and kept working. Her supervisor, a man named Gerald who was decent but not particularly observant, had once told her in a performance review that she was the kind of employee who made everything around her run smoothly without anyone noticing exactly why. She had thanked him and gone back to her desk. She was not sure whether he had meant it as a compliment. Outside of work, her life was smaller than most people her age expected it to be. She was 31. She had a few close friendships, none of which required much maintenance in the dramatic sense, and a handful of acquaintances she was genuinely fond of, but never called first. She did not dislike people. It was more that she had learned, somewhere in her mid-20s, that the energy required to maintain certain kinds of relationships was more than she had to spare after a full day of managing everything else. So she had gradually, without making a decision about it, narrowed her circle to the people who did not require performance from her. The people she could simply be tired around. Lena was one of those people. She had been, for almost 6 years. They had met at a community art class that neither of them had continued attending after the 3rd session. Amara had gone because someone at work had mentioned it as a good way to meet people, which she had already suspected was bad advice, but had chosen to try anyway. Lena had gone because she was in the middle of a breakup and needed something to do with her hands in the evenings. They had ended up at the same table, working on the same assignment, a still life drawing of fruit that both of them were producing with equal, cheerful incompetence. And Lena had leaned over at one point and said, very quietly, "Mine looks like a crime scene." And Amara had laughed. Not politely, actually laughed. Which was unusual enough that she remembered it. They had gone for coffee after that class, and then the one after, and by the time they both quietly stopped attending the class itself, they had already folded each other into their regular lives without discussing it. That was the kind of friendship it was. Easy in the truest sense of the word, not effortless. They had argued about things, had misunderstandings that took time to smooth out, had been on opposite sides of decisions, but fundamentally easy, in the way that only certain friendships are, where both people somehow know from the beginning that the other person is not going anywhere. Lena worked in graphic design, freelancing for the most part with a couple of steady clients who paid reasonably well in good months, and barely at all in bad ones. She was talented, genuinely, without question, but she had a difficult relationship with consistency, which was a problem in an industry where clients wanted reliable turnaround as much as they wanted good work. She had been on a financial edge for most of the time Amara had known her, sometimes closer to it, sometimes farther, but always somewhere in the vicinity of it. Amara had helped her out in small ways over the years. A short-term loan here, a covered dinner there. Nothing that was ever spoken about directly, because Lena was proud in the specific way that creative people sometimes are. She could accept help if it was offered casually, but she would have refused it if it had been presented as help. By the time things got genuinely bad, Amara had already been watching the signs for months. It started with the calls. Lena began calling more frequently than usual, which in itself was not alarming, but the calls had a different quality to them. They circled around things without landing on them, moved through light topics with an energy that felt effortful. Amara recognized this, because she had done it herself, years ago, when she had been in a situation she did not know how to name. She did not push. She waited. Then came the evening in October, when Lena showed up at Amara's apartment without calling first. She was wearing a jacket that was not warm enough for the temperature, and carrying a bag that was clearly packed in a hurry, with the zipper only half closed and a scarf hanging out of the side. She said, standing in the doorway, "I got evicted, and then, after a pause, or I'm going to be, at the end of the month. I couldn't make the last 2 months, and the landlord stopped accepting partial payments." She said it the way someone says a fact they have been holding alone for a long time, flatly, without expression, like all the feeling has already been used up in the carrying. Amara stepped aside and let her in. She made tea. She did not ask Lena how she had let it get this far, because she already knew how those conversations ended, with the person who was struggling feeling ashamed, and the person who was trying to help feeling like the wrong kind of right. Instead, she asked practical questions. How long until the end of the month? Whether there were other debts attached to the rental? Whether any of the steady clients were owed payments that might come through soon? Lena answered each question carefully, with the relief of someone who has been waiting for permission to be specific about a problem, rather than vague about feelings. By the end of the conversation, which stretched past midnight, with the tea going cold on the table between them, Amara had understood the shape of the situation. Lena needed a place to stay, not for a week or two, but potentially for 2 or 3 months, while she rebuilt a financial base stable enough to get into a new apartment. She needed not to pay rent during that time, because every extra dollar she had needed to go toward clearing the debts that had accumulated and making sure she didn't miss another deadline with her remaining clients. She needed someone to not make her feel terrible about needing all of this. She had not asked for any of it. That was the thing. She had said the bare fact of the eviction, and then gone quiet, clearly steeling herself for questions she was not sure she could answer without falling apart. Amara looked at her across the table. She looked at the half-zipped bag by the door, the scarf trailing out of it, the way Lena was holding her mug with both hands, even though the tea had gone cold, and she thought, not for the first time in their friendship, that Lena was someone who would always find a way to land on her feet, but that the process of falling was harder for her than she ever admitted. She said, "You can have this place." Lena looked up. "My apartment," Amara said. "You can stay here. I'll move out." The silence that followed was not the kind that means a person didn't hear you. It was the kind that means they heard you perfectly, and are trying to understand whether you mean what you said. "You can't move out of your own apartment," Lena said. "I can if I want to," Amara said. "There's a room available in Clara's building. She mentioned it last month. I'll reach out tomorrow. The rent is less than what I'm paying here, and it's on a month-to-month basis." Amara. "The lease is in my name," Amara continued, in the same even tone she used to explain a logistics problem at work. "I'll keep paying it, and you don't pay me back. You save everything you have for deposits and debt and getting back to stable. 2 months, maybe 3. We'll check in at the 1-month mark." Lena stared at her. Her eyes had gone bright, in a way that she was clearly trying to prevent. "You can't do that," she said again. But the second time she said it, it sounded less like an argument, and more like something she was saying to be decent. "I can do it," Amara said, simply. "And I want to, so let me." There was another silence. Then Lena put her mug down very carefully on the table, pressed both hands flat on the surface, and took a breath that was steadier than Amara expected from her. "I'll pay you back," she said. "Every cent." "We don't need to talk about that right now," Amara said. "I'm going to anyway." "I know you are." They sat there for a while longer, not talking, the apartment quiet around them. Amara looked at the bookshelves she had arranged, the east-facing window above the sink, the small kitchen she had stocked over 2 years with things she actually used. She thought about the room at Clara's building, smaller, darker, with a window that faced a brick wall. She felt something, but it was not regret. It was something quieter than that, something that felt almost like purpose, which she would not have called it out loud because she did not like the way that word made a decision sound more important than it was. She had seen a problem. She had a solution. She was going to offer it. That was all. She messaged Clara that night before she went to sleep. Clara responded in the morning. The room was still available. Move-in was flexible. The landlord was fine with short notice. Amara gave notice at her own building. Her own building, she reminded herself, where her name was still on the lease, and began the quiet work of packing only what she needed for a few months, leaving everything else in place for Lena to use. It was a strange thing, packing your own apartment with the intention of coming back to it later. She folded her things into boxes and bags, with a kind of careful attention she did not usually give to the process of moving. She left her bookshelves as they were. She left the kitchen organized the same way. She left the east-facing window clean. On the day she moved her bags into the room at Clara's building, she stood in the small dark space with the brick wall outside the window, and felt the particular quality of silence that belongs to a space that does not yet know you. She set her bag down. She looked around. She told herself it was temporary, because it was. She believed that, because she had no reason not to. What she did not know, could not have known, standing in that quiet rented room with her bag at her feet, was that a chain of events had already been set in motion. Not by anything she had done wrong, not by any failure of judgment or character, simply by the nature of proximity, and of people, and of the way that certain lives intersect at angles you don't see until you're already standing in the middle of them. She did not know about Dominic yet. She had heard the name once or twice in passing, the way you hear names in a social circle, referenced without context, assumed to be familiar. She had not paid attention to it, because she had no reason to. He was part of Lena's world, not hers. But Lena's world and hers had just become, temporarily, the same place. And the things that lived in Lena's world, the histories, the complications, the people who moved through it with their own gravities, were about to begin moving through hers. She did not think about any of that on the day she moved in. She unpacked the things she had brought, made the bed with the sheets she had folded carefully into a bag, set the single lamp she had taken on the small table by the window, and went to make coffee in Clara's shared kitchen down the hall. She was good at starting over in small ways. She had done it before. She knew how to settle into a space that was not really hers, and make it workable without making it comfortable, in the way that would make leaving it harder. She knew how to hold herself lightly, inside a life that was slightly less than what she had built, without letting it bother her more than it was worth. What she did not know how to do, had never learned, in 31 years, was to stop being the kind of person who gave, before she was asked, and then stood quietly in the aftermath, asking nothing in return. That quality, which everyone who loved her considered her most admirable trait, was also the thing that was about to cost her in ways she hadn't calculated. Not because the world was unfair, it often was, but that wasn't the reason. The reason was simpler and stranger than fairness. It was that certain kinds of generosity, the kind that is genuine and uncomplicated and given without strategy, act on the people who receive them in unpredictable ways. Some people receive grace and become better. Some receive it and feel indebted in a way that slowly turns to resentment. And some receive it and are simply changed by it, altered in a way they cannot name or reverse, carrying something they didn't ask for and cannot put down. Dominic was going to be that last kind. But none of that had happened yet. For now, Amara made her coffee in a stranger's kitchen, went back to her small room, and sat by the window with the brick wall outside. She had work tomorrow. She had a routine to rebuild. She had Lena, safe and settled in the apartment where everything was arranged in a system only Amara understood, sleeping in Amara's bed, under Amara's sheets. And somewhere across the city, in a life that had not yet touched hers in any meaningful way, a man named Dominic was beginning a Thursday evening, with no idea that the name Amara even existed. For now, that was fine. It would not stay that way. Lena did not talk about Dominic right away. That was not unusual for her. She processed things in layers, working through the surface ones first before she got to anything deeper. She had always been that way. She could spend an entire phone call discussing the frustrating behavior of a client, the problem with a design brief, the small injustices of daily life, and only at the very end, almost as an afterthought, mention the thing that was actually sitting at the center of everything. Amara had learned to listen for that last thing. It was usually the most important. In the first 2 weeks after Amara moved out and Lena moved into the apartment, they spoke every few days. Lena was settling in, getting her bearings, beginning to work through the practical mess of the eviction's aftermath. There were forms to file, accounts to square, a landlord who was being only partially cooperative about returning a deposit that had been legally held past its limit. Amara helped where she could from a distance, sending the right template for a demand letter, reminding Lena of the deadline for a specific form, looking up the relevant tenant protection laws for the state. She was better at those kinds of problems than Lena was. Not because Lena wasn't capable, but because Lena had a tendency to freeze when paperwork piled up, to look at a stack of forms, and feel a hopelessness that made her start from the bottom rather than the top. By the third week, the practical crisis had stabilized enough that their conversations shifted. They talked more the way they used to, longer, less structured, moving through topics the way a river moves through different landscapes without stopping to name each one. Lena started bringing up memories, things that had happened years ago, observations about people they both knew. She was relaxing. Amara could hear it in the difference between how she said things at the beginning of the call versus the end. It was during one of those conversations, about 3 weeks in, that Dominic's name came up for the first time in any real way. They had been talking about an acquaintance of Lena's who had recently gotten into a relationship with someone everyone in the group had predicted she would end up with, and the mild satisfaction of watching a prediction come true. Lena laughed about it, said something about how sometimes the obvious thing was obvious for a good reason, and then she went slightly quiet in a way that Amara recognized. "What?" Amara asked. "Nothing," Lena said. Then, a moment later, "Actually, I've been seeing someone." Amara waited. "His name is Dominic," Lena said. "He's been around the group for a while. You might have heard his name. People talk about him a lot." Amara did have a faint impression of the name. She had heard it referenced a handful of times over the past year or so, usually in the context of social events she had attended the edges of, but not really participated in. The impression she had was vague but distinct enough. Someone whose presence tended to reorganize a room in a subtle way. Someone other people monitored without quite meaning to. She had never met him. She had no strong feeling about him in any direction. "How long?" she asked. "About 2 months," Lena said. There was a tone in her voice that was difficult to categorize, not quite happy and not quite uncomfortable. Something in between, like a person standing in a doorway. "And?" Amara said. Lena was quiet for a moment. "He's very present," she said finally. "Like, when he pays attention to you, he pays full attention. It's a lot. Is that good or bad?" Another pause. "Both, I think. Mostly good." She said it as though she was still deciding. Amara did not press further. That was not her role, and she knew it. Lena would tell her more when she was ready to, and if she wasn't ready to, that was also fine. The friendship between them had always operated with that understanding, that there were parts of each other's lives that were handed over fully, and parts that were held back until the moment felt right, and neither of them had ever tried to take more than what was offered. So she let it sit. She noted the name. She moved on. Over the next 2 weeks, Dominic came up more often, always in the same oblique way, mentioned at the edge of stories about other things, referenced without context, appearing and disappearing from Lena's conversation the way a recurring character does in the early episodes of a show, before you fully understand what role they're going to play. Amara got a picture, piece by piece. He was a few years older than both of them. He worked in something related to property development, or adjacent to it. She was never quite clear on the specifics. He had a close group of male friends who had been tight since university. He was, by most accounts, confident in a way that read as security rather than arrogance, at least from a distance. Most accounts was Lena's phrasing, not Amara's. Lena used it with a slight dryness that Amara caught but didn't comment on. It was during the 5th week of Amara's time in the rented room at Clara's building that the conversations about Dominic began to shift in quality. Not dramatically, just enough that Amara started paying closer attention. It started with a small story. Lena mentioned, casually, that she and Dominic had plans for a Saturday evening, and he had changed them without asking her, replacing them with something he preferred. She told the story lightly, in the tone of a minor irritation, rather than a serious concern, and Amara did not react to it, beyond asking whether they had talked about it afterward. Lena said they had, sort of. He had explained that the original plan hadn't worked out on his end, and the new plan was a good one anyway. She had let it go. Amara filed it away without commenting. A week later, there was another story. A friend of Lena's from the design world had commented on something Dominic had done at a group gathering. Not critically, just observationally, the kind of comment that was meant as conversation. Dominic had not liked it. not in any dramatic way. He had simply cooled toward that person for the rest of the evening, in a manner that everyone in the room felt but no one mentioned. Lena described it with the specific carefulness of someone who is not sure whether what they observed was significant or not. "Did it bother you?" Amara asked. "A little," Lena said, "but maybe I'm being too sensitive." Amara did not say what she thought. What she thought was that maybe I'm being too sensitive was a phrase she had heard many people use at the beginning of a pattern they hadn't fully named yet. But she also knew that saying so early, before the pattern was clear, was rarely useful and often harmful. It could make a person defensive of someone they hadn't decided to leave, and it could create a wedge in the friendship that became its own problem. So she said, "What does your gut tell you?" "That it's probably nothing," Lena said. "And what does your gut tell you under that?" A pause. Then Lena laughed, not entirely comfortably. "That it might be something." "Then pay attention to it," Amara said. "That's all." The weeks continued. Amara went to work, managed her logistics problems, came home to the small room with the brick wall view. She had made it workable in the way she always did. A second lamp from a second-hand shop, a small plant on the windowsill that got almost no light but was surviving anyway, a coffee setup in the corner that was better than the shared kitchen option. She had made it hers without making it home. There was a difference, and she held to it. She called her parents once a week, on Sunday evenings. Her father, a retired school teacher, who had the quality of patience in conversation that she suspected she had inherited from him, asked about work. Her mother, who was sharper and quicker and always seemed to be tracking several things at once, asked about everything else. Amara gave them the broad shape of things. She was well, work was busy, she was staying with a friend temporarily, while some logistics were sorted out. She did not mention the apartment. There was nothing to gain from worrying them about something that was not, in her assessment, worth worrying about. It was on a Tuesday evening in the 7th week that Lena called and said, without any warm-up at all, "He told me last week that I was too emotional." Amara set down the book she had been reading. "Tell me what happened." Lena told her. There had been an argument, not a large one, but a real one, about something that had been building for a while. Something to do with the way he had handled a situation involving a mutual friend of theirs, a thing that had left Lena feeling like she had been spoken for, rather than spoken to. She had raised it with him the way she raised most things, directly, but not aggressively. He had listened, or appeared to, and then he had said that she was reading too much into it, and that her emotional response was making it harder to have a rational conversation. Amara heard the story in its entirety without interrupting. This was something she was practiced at, receiving the full shape of a thing before she responded to any part of it, because people almost always said the most important thing somewhere in the middle, not at the beginning or end, and if you responded too early, you missed it. When Lena finished, Amara said, "How did you respond when he said that?" "I backed down," Lena said, "which I know was wrong, but he made me feel like I was the problem, and when someone does that convincingly enough, you go along with it. You start doubting yourself." "I know," Amara said. "It's not like he's cruel," Lena said. "He's not. Most of the time he's genuinely warm. That's what makes it confusing. It's like there are two versions, and you can't predict which one you're going to get." Amara was quiet for a moment, then she said, carefully, "That unpredictability, does it make you try harder to get the warm version?" Lena did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was slightly different. "Yeah," she said. "It does. That's the part worth paying attention to," Amara said. They talked for a long time after that. Amara did not tell Lena what to do. She did not diagnose the relationship, or assign names to what she was hearing. She asked questions and listened to the answers, and by the end of the call, Lena sounded not resolved but slightly clearer, the way a person sounds when they have taken something they were carrying privately, and finally put it on a table, where both people can look at it. When the call ended, Amara sat in her room for a while, with the book face down on her lap. She thought about what she had heard. She thought about the gap between who a person seemed to be and who they revealed themselves to be in the private landscape of a relationship. She thought about Lena, who was resilient in most areas of her life, but had always had a particular vulnerability in relationships, a tendency to reshape herself around another person's shape, a habit of editing her own reactions to fit someone else's comfort. She thought about Dominic, whom she still had never met, whose name was becoming more familiar to her in the second-hand way that names do when they're attached to a story you're following from the outside. She did not think about him beyond that. He was Lena's person. That was the full extent of what he was to her. She picked up her book and found her place, and continued reading. Outside the window, the brick wall was the same as it always was. The small plant on the sill leaned almost imperceptibly toward the narrow strip of light that came through in the afternoons. Amara had been watching it do that for weeks now. It was a good plant. It knew what it needed and moved toward it without making a fuss. She was, without knowing it, doing the same. Moving toward something slowly, without making a fuss, without quite seeing yet where she was going. The call she had that Tuesday evening was not the last one where Dominic was discussed. There would be more. Some lighter, some heavier, some circling around things that Lena was not quite ready to put into words. And all of it would gradually, over the weeks that followed, begin to form a picture. Not a complete one. Not yet. But enough of one that by the time Amara finally met Dominic in person, she would not be starting from nothing. She would be walking in already holding half the story. She just didn't know yet that she was the one who would eventually have to decide what to do with it. The gathering happened on a Friday evening in November. Amara had not planned to go. She had been invited through a message in a group of mutual acquaintances, the kind of loose social arrangement where different circles overlapped just enough to justify a shared event. She had read the invitation and initially decided to decline, the way she often did, when the event involved a crowd of people she did not know well and a social energy she would have to maintain for several hours. But Clara had mentioned she was going, and Lena had said she would be there too, and Amara had found herself, on the afternoon of the event, reconsidering. She had been in the small rented room for nearly 2 months at that point. She had been working, managing, quietly sustaining herself in the way she always did. She had not been out socially in several weeks. There was a version of herself that was telling her, in the mild but persistent way that voice sometimes did, that she was becoming too isolated, in a way that was not intentional discipline but just gradual withdrawal, and that it would be good for her to go. She went. The gathering was at the home of a couple, Owen and Diane, who Amara knew slightly through a work acquaintance of Diane's. Their apartment was spacious and warm, and filled with the kind of soft conversational noise that came from about 30 people, who were all comfortable enough to talk, but not so comfortable that they had forgotten to make the effort. Someone had made a large pot of something that smelled like it had been cooking for hours. The lighting was low and generous. Music came from somewhere, at a volume that existed to set a tone rather than be heard. Amara arrived with Clara, who immediately spotted someone she knew, and drifted toward them in the natural way that Clara always moved through social spaces, easily, without hesitation, as though she had always been exactly where she was. Amara did not mind being left. She found her own way across the room toward the table of drinks, poured herself something, and turned around to take in the space. She saw Lena across the room, talking to 2 people she didn't recognize. Lena caught her eye, and raised her hand in a small wave. Amara returned it. She did not move toward her immediately, not wanting to interrupt the conversation she was in. And then she noticed him. She noticed him not because he was doing anything dramatic, but because of the way the space around him worked. There was a loose cluster of 4 people, and he was at the center of it in a way that he had not arranged. It was simply where the conversation had organized itself, the way furniture in a room with good acoustics tends to arrange toward the best sound. He was talking to someone, gesturing with one hand, and the person he was talking to was leaning slightly forward in a way that meant he was genuinely engaged, not just politely present. She looked at him for a moment. He was tall without being conspicuously so. He had a face that was regular in its features, but with a quality of attention in the eyes. Even from across the room, she could see that he was looking at whoever he was speaking to, with the kind of focus that made people feel that they were the only person in the space. She had met very few people who had that quality genuinely, rather than as a performance. It was, she recognized, a specific kind of gift, and it was also, she knew from everything Lena had told her, a specific kind of danger. This was Dominic. She knew it before Lena confirmed it later in the evening. She did not go toward him. She moved through the party at her own pace, speaking to Clara when they found each other again, meeting a woman named Frances who worked in urban planning and had strong and interesting opinions about pedestrian infrastructure, finding herself in a long conversation about a book she had not read, but knew enough about to contribute to. She was comfortable with this, moving through a social space at a measured pace, finding the conversations that were genuinely interesting and staying in them, letting the rest of the evening happen around her. She had almost forgotten about him when he appeared at her side. It was near the kitchen, when she had gone to refill her drink and found herself briefly alone, while Francis had stepped away to find someone. She was standing at the table when she heard, from just beside her, "You've been in that urban planning conversation for about 40 minutes. Either you're an expert or it genuinely has you." She turned. Dominic was standing a few feet away, pouring something from a bottle with the ease of a person who was comfortable in borrowed spaces. He was looking at her with a mild, direct interest that was not aggressive, but was not indirect either. "Neither," she said. "Francis is very good at making her area seem important." "She is," he agreed. "That's its own skill." He offered his hand. "Dominic." "Amara." He held her hand for a moment longer than a handshake required, not in a manner that was inappropriate, just enough that it registered. "You're here with Lena," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," she said. "And with Clara. You know Lena." "I do," he said. He said it without elaboration, which she noted but did not react to. He poured his drink and then settled into a position that was relaxed but attentive, the way a person stands when they intend for the conversation to continue. What followed was not what she had expected. She had arrived at the party with a faint, preformed neutrality about him. Not hostility, but a kind of careful distance. She had heard too much over the previous weeks to be entirely open, but she was also too fair-minded to let what she'd heard decide the encounter before it began. She intended to be polite and brief, but the conversation did not cooperate. He asked her real questions, not the usual questions, not the ones that were really just statements about the asker dressed as curiosity. He asked about what she actually did at work, and then asked a follow-up that demonstrated he had been listening to her answer, rather than waiting for his turn to speak. He asked what she thought about something Francis had said during the urban planning conversation, which meant he had noticed her in it earlier, and had remembered the detail. She was not sure what to do with that except to answer honestly. He disagreed with one of her points, not aggressively, with a specific counter-argument that was actually well-reasoned. She found herself pushing back on his counter-argument. He seemed to enjoy that. They talked for what she later estimated was about 25 minutes. She was not keeping track at the time. She was simply talking, which was unusual for her at social events, where she tended to engage in bursts rather than sustained conversation. Lena appeared at the edge of her vision at some point during it. Amara caught the moment, Lena registering the conversation, taking in the fact of it, her expression doing something complicated and quick, before settling back into neutral. Amara marked it without making it obvious that she had. She did not change the tone of the conversation, or create any distance from it. She simply continued, and told herself she would check in with Lena about it later. When the conversation with Dominic ended, someone pulled him away, which he acknowledged with a brevity that suggested mild irritation. Amara stood in the kitchen for a moment with her drink and took a breath. She was not sure what she felt. She was very clear about what she had heard Lena tell her over the past several weeks. She was very clear about the pattern she had been watching piece together. She was also, honestly and against her intention, slightly disarmed by him, by the particular quality of his attention, by the fact that his reputation for being a certain kind of person had not quite matched what she had just experienced, which told her one of two things. Either his reputation was overdrawn, or he was not the same person in all circumstances, and the circumstances that brought out his less admirable qualities had not been present tonight. The second possibility seemed more likely to her. She had seen enough of people to know that the gap between how someone behaved when they were at their best and how they behaved when they were at their worst was usually not a contradiction, but a range. Dominic's range, based on everything she knew, was wide. That was not a comfortable thing. She found Lena later in the evening, and they stood together for a while, speaking about the party, about Francis, about Owen and Diane's apartment. Lena mentioned Dominic once, carefully, asking how their conversation had gone. Amara said it had been fine, which was honest. She didn't expand on it. Lena did not ask her to. On the walk home, which she did alone, because Clara was staying later, Amara thought about the evening. She thought about what Lena had told her, and what she had just seen, and about the gap between the two. She thought about what it meant to have an understanding of someone from the outside versus the experience of being in front of them, and about how those two things could coexist, accurate information, and disarming presence, both at once, neither canceling the other. She reached her building, climbed the stairs to her room, sat on the edge of her bed in her coat. She was not going to do anything with what she felt. That was not a consideration. Lena was her closest friend. Dominic was Lena's person. The feeling she was working through, careful, barely formed, uncomfortable, was hers to manage privately, and she was capable of managing it. She had managed harder things. She took off her coat. She put it on the hook behind the door. She got ready for bed with the systematic efficiency she brought to most of her practical life. The question that stayed at the back of her mind was not about him or about herself. It was something quieter, the kind of question that begins when you see someone clearly and cannot decide whether the clarity you have is an advantage or a weight. She slept eventually. In the morning, she made coffee and went to work, and returned 17 emails and managed a warehouse dispute, and ate lunch at her desk. She did not think about Dominic more than twice. She was almost entirely sure she was fine. There was a shift in November that Amara did not name immediately, the way certain changes in weather are not named until the temperature has already moved past the point where naming them would have been useful. She went about her days with the same routine that had held her steady for the past 2 months. Early mornings, the walk to work, the structure of logistics problems that had clear solutions if you paid close enough attention to find them. But underneath that routine, something had recalibrated in a way she could not account for, by pretending it hadn't happened. The conversation at Owen and Diane's party had been 2 weeks ago. She had not seen Dominic since. She had not looked for a reason to. But she had thought about him more than she intended to, and each time she caught herself doing it, she took a careful internal inventory and reminded herself of everything she knew, not as a punishment, but as a compass check. She was someone who trusted her own sense of direction. She also knew that direction could be influenced by things that were not reliable, and she was careful about the difference. Lena called on a Wednesday evening, 12 days after the party, and the call was different from the others. She could hear it in the first 30 seconds, a tightness, a quality of restraint that was unlike Lena, who generally spoke with the ease of someone who had long ago given up pretending she was less emotional than she was. This time, she was measuring her words in a way that told Amara she had been sitting with whatever she was about to say for long enough that it had developed a shape she was nervous about handing over. Amara waited. Lena said, "Something happened last weekend. I've been trying to decide if I should tell you." "You should tell me," Amara said, not because she was sure of that, but because Lena would not have called if she had decided not to. Another pause. Dominic said something, about the night of Owen and Diane's party. Amara went still. "He said he found you interesting," Lena said. The word interesting was delivered with a specific flatness that held more inside it than the word itself contained. "He said he thought you were different from the people I usually know. I don't know exactly what he meant by that. I'm not sure I want to." "He was making conversation," Amara said. "I know," Lena said. "That's what I told myself. And I also know that you would never—" She stopped. "I know that. I do. It's not that I think anything happened, or that you did anything wrong. It's more that he brought it up, that he mentioned it at all, and the way he mentioned it." Amara was quiet for a moment, parsing what she was being told. Dominic had brought up the conversation with her, had raised it with Lena, unprompted, and described her in terms that were somehow significant enough that Lena had sat with it for 12 days before telling her. She thought about what to say. She thought about all the things she knew about Dominic, pieced together over weeks of listening, filtered through her own encounter with him, weighed against her natural instinct to be fair to people she didn't know fully. She thought about Lena, who was sitting somewhere right now, holding a feeling she hadn't asked for and didn't deserve. "How did you respond when he said it?" Amara asked. "I didn't say much," Lena said. "I didn't know what to say. I just sort of moved past it." "Did it feel like he was trying to make you feel something?" A pause. "Yes," Lena said. "I think so. But maybe I'm reading it wrong. Maybe he genuinely just mentioned it. People who genuinely just mention things don't usually frame them the way you're describing," Amara said. Lena was quiet. "What I mean," Amara continued, "is that if it landed the way it sounds like it landed, it was probably designed to land that way. That's the part worth paying attention to, not because of anything about me, but because of what it tells you about the way he operates." "I know," Lena said. She said it in a voice that carried the weight of someone who had been knowing something for a long time, and was only now letting herself say it out loud. They talked for a while longer. Not about Dominic specifically, about the broader shape of things, about what it meant to be in a relationship with someone whose warmth felt real, but whose behavior had an edge that occasionally made you doubt your own reading of it. About the way that kind of uncertainty was its own kind of control, because if a person always felt slightly unsure whether they were seeing clearly, they spent their energy on self-correction, instead of on holding the other person accountable. Amara said all of that carefully, in her own way, not as diagnosis but as observation. She never named it directly. She never said the thing out loud that she was thinking, which was that what Lena had been describing for the past several weeks was a pattern she had seen before in other people's lives, and had a specific shape. She did not say it because Lena had not asked for that and was not ready for it, and saying it unprompted, too early, would only create a defensive spiral that helped no one. What she said instead was, trust your own account of what you experienced. When you're with someone who makes you doubt your account of your own experience, that's the thing to pay attention to, not the specific incidents, the pattern. There was a long silence. Then Lena said, "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise," Amara said. "I just listen." Same thing. Sometimes. After the call ended, Amara sat in her room and felt the particular weight of a situation she was standing at the edge of, and had no clean way to manage. She was collecting information she had not asked to collect, about a man she had no claim to an opinion about, in a relationship that was not hers, involving a friend she cared about more than she cared about most things in her life. The information was building towards something. She could feel the shape of it without yet being able to see the whole. She turned off the lamp and lay down and closed her eyes. Outside the window, the city was doing what the city always did at this hour, turning itself gradually quieter, its noise thinning down to a register that was almost like breathing. She had gotten used to listening to it. She had gotten used to most things, in the way she always did. It was one of her qualities. It was also sometimes her problem. There were 3 weeks left before the thing that would change all of it would happen. Neither of them knew that. Life rarely announces itself before it arrives. The month of December moved in the way December always moved. Faster than expected, with the peculiar compression of the year's end, pressing everything slightly closer together. Amara noticed it in small ways. The light changed. The morning walks to work were colder and darker and strangely pleasant in their emptiness, the streets not yet full, the city suspended briefly between what it was and what the day would ask it to be. She had always liked that hour. It was one of the few times she felt as though she had arrived somewhere before anyone else and had a moment alone with the place. Lena and she had spoken twice since the call about Dominic. Both times had been lighter in tone. Updates, small stories, the ordinary current of a friendship that had been running for 6 years and knew how to find its own level after a heavy conversation. Lena had not brought Dominic up again in any serious way. Amara had not asked. She was holding the space open, the way she did, neither pressing into it nor closing it off. She had not seen him again. She had thought about the possibility of seeing him, in the way you think about the possibility of rain when you know the weather is unstable, not dwelling on it, but aware of it. She had been to one social gathering in the 3 weeks since Owen and Diane's party, and he had not been there. She had felt, when she arrived and confirmed his absence, a relief that she examined honestly and did not like the implications of. Relief at someone's absence was itself a kind of preoccupation. She noted it. She did not feed it. She had been thinking, over those weeks, about what Lena had told her. All of it, accumulated. The incident where Dominic changed plans without asking. The way he had cooled toward the friend who had commented on him. The conversation where he had called Lena too emotional. The way he had mentioned Amara by name to Lena after the party, in terms that had been designed to land a specific way. She had been laying it out the way she would lay out a logistics problem, mapping the pieces, looking for the underlying pattern, identifying which elements were isolated incidents and which were part of a system. It was a system. She was increasingly sure of that. And then there was an evening, a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the party, when she was at a small neighborhood bookshop that hosted occasional readings. She went to these when she remembered, which was not often enough to be a regular, but often enough to feel a mild loyalty to the place. The reading was from a local writer whose first book she had enjoyed, and whose second she had not yet gotten to. and she arrived a few minutes late and found a seat near the back. After the reading, she was standing near a shelf of poetry collections, looking at the spines without really reading them, in the mild, pleasurable trance that bookshops reliably produced in her. When she heard someone say her name, she turned. Dominic was standing a few feet away, holding a book with his finger between two pages, as though he had been browsing when he saw her. He looked genuinely surprised, not performing the surprise, but registering it honestly. "I didn't know you came here," he said. "I come occasionally," she said. She kept her tone even. "Same," he said. He looked down at the book in his hand, then back at her. "What did you think of the reading?" They talked about the reading. Then, because the reading led to the book, and the book led to other books, and other books led to other things, they talked for longer than Amara had intended. He was the same as he had been at the party, attentive, quick, genuinely interested in what she thought. At one point he said something about a particular argument in a novel she had loved, and was wrong about it in a specific way she found interesting, rather than frustrating, and she told him so, and the look on his face was one she could not read entirely, but that seemed to contain a kind of pleasure at being challenged by someone who meant it. At no point did they mention Lena. Amara noted this and said nothing about it. When they left the bookshop, separately, she made sure of it. She walked home in the cold and felt the complicated weight of something she had been managing carefully for weeks, now pressing more heavily than before. She had not done anything wrong. She had had a conversation in a public place with a person she had encountered by chance. There was nothing in it that required apology or concealment. What she could not resolve, walking home in the December dark, was the fact that both times she had spoken to Dominic she had felt, briefly, as though she were someone slightly different from who she was the rest of the time. Not better, not worse, just sharpened. As though some part of her that usually stayed quiet had been activated in his presence and was still running. That feeling was inconvenient. She did not want it, and she did not trust it. What she knew about him, through everything Lena had told her, made her distrust easy charm and easy attention as qualities in themselves. She had watched those qualities be used at Lena's expense. She was not prepared to find them appealing just because they were being directed at her instead. But she was honest enough to know that knowing something and feeling something were not always in the same room at the same time. She reached home. She made tea. She sat at the small table in her room and held the mug in both hands the way Lena had held hers, weeks ago, the night of the eviction. She was good at starting over. She was good at managing. She was good at knowing what the right thing was. What she was less good at was the particular discomfort of knowing the right thing and finding that it had a cost she had not fully estimated when she agreed to it. She sat with those truths in the quiet of her room. She did not try to resolve them. She simply let them sit. The city wound down a little, the way it always did toward the end of the year. Not quieter, exactly, but somehow more collected. Amara sat and held her tea and did not sleep until late. Something was coming. She could feel the shape of it now more clearly than before, and when it arrived, she would do what she always did. She would figure out what the right thing was, and she would do it. It was a Thursday evening in December when Amara arrived at what she later recognized as the center of everything. She had spent 2 days thinking carefully, not about the feeling. She had done enough with that, examined it with enough honesty. She had moved past the feeling, or found a way to hold it at a distance. What she was thinking about was something harder and more specific. She had been collecting, for weeks now, a set of things that Lena had told her. Not systematically. She was not that kind of person. But the things had accumulated in the way that certain facts do when you are close enough to a situation to receive them. And they had accumulated into a picture that she could no longer pretend she wasn't seeing. Dominic had changed plans without asking, and dismissed Lena's frustration when she raised it. He had shown a coldness towards someone who had mildly challenged him in a social setting. He had called Lena too emotional during an argument, which was a specific kind of dismissal, one that relocated the problem from his behavior to her reaction. He had mentioned Amara to Lena after their first conversation in a way that had been calculated to create a particular feeling, and Lena, who was one of the most self-aware people Amara knew in most areas of her life, was becoming progressively less certain of her own account of her own experience. She was beginning to edit herself. She was beginning to move around the edges of things, rather than through them, the way a person does when they have learned, inside a relationship, that the direct route creates more problems than it solves. Amara recognized all of this. She did not recognize it from any external reference point. She recognized it because she had watched it happen in other situations, with other people, over the course of 31 years of paying attention. She also knew something else, that what she knew could be useful, or it could sit unused inside her where it was already sitting, and that the question of what to do with it was not really a question about Dominic at all. It was a question about what kind of person she was, and what kind of friend. She called him. She had his number, because Lena had shared it in a group message months ago. She sat on the edge of her bed in her room, the small plant on the sill with its patient lean toward the light, and she made the call. He answered after 3 rings. His voice was even. Amara. He knew who was calling. She kept her voice level. I need to speak with you, she said, about something specific. I'd like to do it in person. A pause. Then, when? Tomorrow evening, she said, if that works. It does, he said. No questions, no qualifications. They agreed on a place, a quiet bar she knew near her building, neutral, public, practical. She set the phone down. She looked at the plant for a moment. Then she got up and went to make herself something to eat, and did not think about the next evening more than she needed to. She slept, and in the morning she worked, and in the afternoon she came home and changed into something plain and practical, and walked to the bar, and arrived 3 minutes early. He was already there. He was sitting at a corner table, not at the bar. He had a glass of water in front of him. He stood when she came in, which she had not expected from him, and she found herself recalibrating again, setting aside what she expected and allowing what was actually in front of her. She sat. The bar was quiet. A Thursday, and early enough that the after-work crowd had not yet arrived. Soft noise, low light, the kind of place that absorbed conversation rather than amplifying it. He was looking at her with the same quality of attention she had noticed the first time. She met it directly. She had not come here to be careful. I'm going to tell you something, she said, before he could say anything. And I'd like you to let me finish before you respond. He nodded. He picked up the glass of water and held it, but did not drink from it. He was listening. She began. She told him what Lena had told her. Not all of it, not the private things, not the most vulnerable moments, but the shape of it, clearly and without softening. She told him what she had observed about Lena's increasing uncertainty in her own experience. She told him what she recognized in the pattern she had been watching. She did not use dramatic language. She did not accuse him of anything by name. She simply described what she had seen, in the same methodical way she would describe a logistics problem. Here is what I observed. Here is the sequence of it. Here is what it looks like from outside. She told him that she thought Lena was a person of genuine warmth and unusual resilience, and that she was watching that resilience being quietly eroded, and that it mattered to her, that Lena mattered to her, that she was not saying this to harm anyone or to involve herself in something that was not her business, but because she had reached a point where not saying it felt like a decision in itself, a decision to stand near someone she cared about while they were being diminished and to do nothing, and she was not capable of making that decision. She said, at the end, something she had thought about carefully. You are good with people, Dominic. That is clear. What I'm not sure about is whether you are good to people, and I think you might benefit from sitting with the difference. She stopped. She had said everything she had come to say. The room was quiet. He had not moved throughout. When she finished, he was still. He set the glass down slowly. He said nothing for a moment. Then, you're right. She had not expected that. Not about everything, he said. I'd push back on some of it. But the part about knowing the difference between being good with people and being good to them, you're right about that. I've been told that before. I've let it sit without doing anything about it. She did not respond. She had nothing to respond to. He looked at her. Why are you telling me this? Not why in the sense of, I understand what you said about Lena. I mean, what did it cost you to come here tonight? She thought about the question. It was a better question than she had anticipated. It cost me not being sure how you would receive it, she said, and not being sure what it would do to a friendship I care about. Those are real costs, he said. Yes, she said. Another silence. A couple came into the bar and were seated near the window. The bartender moved quietly behind the counter. All of it was happening at a remove. as though the world had agreed to stay slightly back from the table where they were sitting. Amara reached for her coat, which was on the back of her chair. "You're going," he said. "Not a question." "I've said what I came to say," she said. He looked at her with an expression she did not have a clean word for. It was not sadness exactly, and not surprise, but something in the vicinity of both. "You came here specifically to say something that didn't benefit you," he said, slowly, as though testing the idea for logic. "And now you're leaving, before I can say anything back." She stood. "The point wasn't to have a conversation," she said. "The point was to say it." She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She looked at him for a moment, at the face that had this specific quality of attention, at the hands still on the table, at the man who was both exactly what she'd expected and not at all what she'd expected, in a way she still couldn't reconcile. "Good night, Dominic," she said. And she left. She walked out of the bar and turned left and walked toward home, without stopping, without looking back. The air was cold. Her footsteps were steady. She felt, with each block, the weight of what she had done, not regret, but the particular gravity of having done a real thing, a thing that could not be undone, that had cost something even if she hadn't yet fully understood the price. She walked, and the city moved around her, and behind her she left a man sitting alone at a corner table, with a glass of water, and a question that was going to take him much longer to answer than she would ever know. She did not know that yet. She simply walked. The walk home took 11 minutes. She reached her room and sat on the bed and placed her bag on the floor and did not move for approximately 10 minutes. She was not stunned. She was not regretful. She was in that particular internal state that follows a thing you have prepared for and executed correctly, a kind of aftermath that is not quite relief and not quite exhaustion, but something that borrows from both, a clearing, like a sky after rain. She thought about his face when she had stood, the expression she had not had a clean word for. She had been honest with herself throughout the past several weeks about what she felt, and she continued to be honest now. That expression had landed in her. It had not moved her from her course, because nothing moved her from a course she had committed to, but it had registered in the part of her that she could not manage with reason alone. She noted it. She set it down. She had done what she went there to do. She had said what she had gone to say. She had left without lingering, without giving the situation more room than it deserved, without allowing the feeling she had been managing carefully to find a crack to move through. That was the full account of what had happened, and she held to it. What arrived first, in the days that followed, was silence. A specific kind of silence, not empty, but full of things happening at a distance she couldn't see. She went to work. She managed her logistics problems. She came home. She made coffee. She called her father on Sunday. She did not call Lena, because she did not know yet whether Lena needed to know what she had done, or when, or how. She spent 4 days in that silence, carrying what she had done the way you carry something fragile, carefully, without rushing, without bumping it against anything that might change its shape, before you could set it down safely. On the 5th day after the bar, she got a message from Lena. It said only, "Can we talk tonight?" She called her that evening. Lena answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady, in a way that had been prepared rather than natural, the steadiness of someone who has rehearsed a tone rather than arrived at it. Lena said, "He ended things." Amara was quiet. "Last night," Lena said, "he said he had been handling things badly, that he hadn't been honest enough about it. He said he didn't want to keep doing that." A pause. "I didn't expect it." "Are you okay?" Amara asked. "I think so," Lena said. That's the part I can't figure out. I expected to feel worse, but I mostly feel like something was pressing on me, and now it isn't. Like a sound that's been going for a long time, that you only notice when it stops." "That makes sense," Amara said. "He was good in some ways," Lena said. "I want to be fair about that. He could be really present, warm, but I was losing track of what I thought. I was editing myself constantly, and when something costs that much, it stops being about the good parts." "Yes," Amara said. Lena was quiet for a moment. "Then, did you talk to him?" The question was quiet, not accusatory, just asked. "Yes," Amara said. A silence. "When?" Lena asked. "Last Thursday," Amara said. "A few days ago." Another silence. Longer. Then Lena said, "What did you say?" Amara told her. Not everything. Some things were not hers to repeat in full, but the shape of it. She said she had told him what she had observed, in the way that only someone who had been listening to Lena for weeks had the material to observe it. She said she had told him the truth as she understood it, and that she had done it not to intervene in a relationship that was not hers, but because she had reached a point where silence was itself a choice she couldn't make. When she finished, there was a silence that had a different texture from the ones before it. "Why didn't you tell me you were going to do that?" Lena said. Her voice was not angry. It was something more careful than that. "Because I didn't know if it was the right thing," Amara said. "And I didn't want you to tell me not to. And if I had told you not to?" "I would have listened," Amara said. "And I might have gone anyway, I'm not sure." Another silence. Then Lena said, "You went there for me." "Yes," Amara said. "And you said things that were hard to say." "Yes." "And you walked away without, you didn't do it to get anything." "No," Amara said. "I didn't." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Amara waited inside it without trying to fill it. She had learned, over 6 years of this friendship, that some silences needed to run their full length before anything could be said inside them. Finally, Lena said, "I don't know how to be in a friendship like this." "You're doing fine," Amara said. She heard Lena take a breath. "I'm going to cry now," Lena said, "and I'd prefer if we pretended I didn't." "I don't know what you're talking about," Amara said. And Lena laughed, a real laugh, the kind she had first heard from her at an art class, over a still life that looked like a crime scene, clear and sudden and entirely itself. After the call ended, Amara sat in her room and did not move for a while. The plant on the windowsill had grown noticeably over the weeks. The lamp threw a warm circle on the ceiling. She could hear the building settle around her, the small sounds of other lives going on in adjacent spaces, behind shared walls, down the hallway. She had lived in this rented room for nearly 2 months now, and for the first time, it felt like something other than temporary. She did not think about Dominic that evening, not in the direct way she had been thinking about him for weeks. What she thought about instead was the feeling she had carried since the bar. Not the surface feeling, but the one beneath it. The one that had to do not with him specifically, but with what the whole experience had asked of her, and what it had revealed about who she was. She had always known that she was someone who gave before she was asked. She had understood this as a quality, something she had inherited, or developed, or simply always been. What she was understanding now was that it was also something else. It was a test she applied to herself continuously, often without knowing she was doing it. A standard she held herself to that had nothing to do with what other people expected of her. She had given Lena her apartment not because anyone asked, but because she had looked at a problem and found that she had a solution, and the solution was hers to give. She had gone to Dominic not because anyone had asked, but because she had looked at a situation and found that she had something to say, and the cost of not saying it was higher than the cost of saying it. Both decisions had come from the same place. Neither had been comfortable. Neither had required her to be rewarded. This was her pattern. It had costs she did not always see until they were already paid. She thought about what Dominic had asked her at the bar. "What did it cost you to come here tonight?" She had given him an honest answer. The fuller answer, the one she had not given, because it was not his to have, was this. It had cost her the particular thing she had been most careful about, the thing she had managed with such discipline. Not the feeling itself, because feelings came and went, and she was accustomed to outlasting them, but the acknowledgement of it, the moment of being forced to hold something real about herself in plain view. She had wanted something she had chosen not to reach for, and the choosing had required her to see clearly, at close range, exactly what she was stepping back from. That kind of clarity had a weight to it. She was still carrying it. She did not reach for the phone. She did not call anyone. She sat with the weight until it became something she could carry without strain, which it did, eventually, the way most things did for her. She was patient with herself in the way she was patient with most things that required more time than you initially thought they would. In the morning she got up and made coffee in the shared kitchen, and came back to her room and drank it by the window. The brick wall outside was entirely itself, as it always was. The plant on the sill had found its angle again, its leaves turned in the direction of the narrow strip of daylight that came through each afternoon. She watched it for a moment before she got dressed for work. In the days that followed, she and Lena found their way back to each other, with the ease that genuine friendships almost always have, the ability to absorb something difficult and continue. They spoke more often than they had before any of it happened, and the conversations were different from the ones before. More direct, less managed, with less left unsaid at the edges. Something had been cleared between them, a kind of atmospheric pressure that neither of them had fully named while it was there, which had now lifted. Lena was rebuilding her life with the particular energy she had when she was in recovery mode. Fast, focused, almost willfully forward. She was landing more consistent work. She was looking at new living spaces. She called Amara on a Wednesday afternoon to say she'd found a room in a shared flat and was going to take it, her voice carrying the specific lightness of a person who has found solid ground and is testing their weight on it with cautious relief. Amara said, "That's good." She meant it entirely. Weeks passed in the way that weeks passed when life is in the process of settling. There were no dramatic events. There were only the small, accumulating facts of ordinary days. The work, the coffee, the Sunday calls to her parents, the bookshop once a week, the growing plant on the windowsill that was going to need a larger pot soon. Amara moved through these days with the same composure she had always moved through things, but with a slightly different quality to it. Less braced, less like a person waiting for the next thing to manage. She thought about Dominic occasionally, in the way you think about someone who passed through a specific period of your life and left a mark that was real, without being a wound. She did not romanticize it. She did not diminish it either. She held it as what it was, a genuine thing that had been handled correctly, which was not the same as saying it had been handled without cost. She had a dinner with Clara one evening, near the end of the month, at a place they both liked, and Clara asked how everything was. Amara said good, which was honest. Clara looked at her for a moment in the way Clara sometimes did, with the quality of attention she usually kept at a manageable distance, and said, "You seem different." "Different how?" Amara asked. "Less like you're waiting for something," Clara said. Amara thought about that for a moment. "Maybe," she said. She went home that evening, and stood in her room, and looked at the space around her, the lamp, the plant, the brick wall through the window, which she had long ago stopped minding. She thought about what Clara had said, "Less like you're waiting for something." She understood what that meant, now that it had been named. She had been waiting, in some low, continuous way, for the situation to demand something of her that she wasn't prepared for. The uncertainty of not knowing when the cost would arrive had been its own kind of weight. Now the cost had arrived, and been paid, and she was still standing. And the standing had a different quality than the bracing. She was not a person who expected ease. She never had been. But she had a capacity for it that she rarely allowed herself to fully use, because ease without vigilance had always seemed dangerous to her. She was beginning to wonder if she had been wrong about that. She turned off the lamp and got into bed. Outside the window, the city was the city. The year was moving toward its end. She had given away her apartment and gotten it back. She had given a man a truth he had not asked for, and walked away without waiting for a response. She had held something real inside herself, and managed it without letting it manage her. And somewhere across the city, in a room she had never been in, Dominic was beginning to understand that the conversation in the bar had not ended when she left. It was still going, in the quietest way, inside him, asking him things he did not yet have answers for. She did not know that. She did not need to. Her part was done. Dominic did not speak about the conversation to anyone for a long time. Not because he was secretive by nature. He was not, particularly. But because he did not have words for it yet, and he was someone who waited for words before he spoke. It was, in fact, one of the more honest things about him. He would not describe a thing until he could describe it accurately. And what had happened in that bar on a Thursday evening in December was not yet something he could describe accurately. He had not expected the call. He had not expected the meeting. He had not expected her to say what she had said, with the calm, undecorated directness that she had used, looking at him without anger, and without the performance of anger, saying the thing directly, and then placing it on the table between them like a document he was being asked to acknowledge, rather than a weapon he was expected to defend against. He had spent most of his adult life being the person in the room who understood people, not manipulatively. He genuinely had that quality, the ability to read a person, to know what they needed before they said it, to calibrate his presence to what a situation required. It had served him well. It had also, he understood now in a way he was still working through, sometimes become a substitute for something harder. Being skilled at understanding people did not automatically mean you were being good to them. You could understand someone perfectly and still treat them in a way that served your own comfort more than theirs. He had not thought about it in those terms before Amara sat across from him and said the words as simply as she had said them. "You are good with people, Dominic. What I'm not sure about is whether you are good to them." It was not the harshest thing anyone had ever said to him. He had been spoken to more critically, by people who had reason to be, in moments that had required him to be defensive or contrite, or both. But those moments had always had the quality of an argument. They had edges and heat, and they required him to do something with the energy, to return it, or absorb it, or deflect it. What Amara had done was different. She had said a true thing, in a room with no heat and no edges, and then left. And the truth had stayed sitting at the table long after she was gone. He had gone home that night and sat with it. He did not call anyone. He did not drink more than he ordinarily would have. He simply sat and thought, which was not something he did often in that particular unguarded way. He was usually doing something while he thought, moving through the world, processing at the edges rather than head-on. That evening he sat still, and thought head-on, and it was uncomfortable in a way he did not try to resolve. He ended things with Lena 5 days later, not because Amara had told him to. She had not told him to. She had described a pattern and named what it meant and left him to do with it what he would. He had ended things because sitting with what had been described, honestly, and without the protective layer of his own interpretation, he could not justify continuing. He could see, from the outside of himself for the first time in a while, what the relationship had been asking of Lena, and what he had been doing when she had asked for anything back. He was not ready, in that moment, to be the version of himself that the relationship would have required. And continuing anyway would have been a choice he would have had to live with. He called Lena. He was honest without being brutal. He said he had been handling things badly, that he hadn't been honest enough about where he was, and that he didn't want to keep doing that. He did not mention Amara. He did not think it was his to mention. In the weeks that followed, he tried to reach Amara twice. The first time was a message, short, not demanding anything, simply saying that he had thought about what she'd said and that it had mattered. She read it, he could see that, and did not respond. The second time was a call, which she did not answer and which he did not leave a voicemail for. He understood, on some level that did not require it to be explained, that she was not being unkind. She had gone to that bar with a specific intention and had carried it out exactly. She had not gone there to open a relationship with him. She had gone there to say a thing, and she had said it, and the saying was the entirety of what she had offered. Reaching back toward her was his own need, not anything she owed him. He understood that. It was harder than he expected it to be. He went about his life. He worked. He saw his friends, the close group he had had since university, men who knew him well enough to notice when something had shifted without being the kind of people who pressed about it. One of them, a man named Patrick, said to him over a drink one evening, "You're somewhere else tonight." Dominic said, "I'm fine." Patrick did not push it. He had known Dominic for over a decade, and he knew when pushing was useful and when it wasn't. Months passed. Dominic dated, in the casual and then less casual ways that a man does when he is in his mid-30s and has a social life that regularly puts him in proximity to people who find him interesting. He went on dinners that were good, evenings that were genuine, connections that had warmth and ease. He was not pretending. He was not going through motions. He was present, genuinely, with each person. But there was a quality missing from each encounter that he could not name and could not fill. He noticed it the way you notice an empty space where something used to be, not loudly, not constantly, but at the edges of things. At the moment in a conversation, when a person said something that was close to what she might have said, and wasn't. At the moment when someone agreed with him too easily, and he felt, in the agreeing, the absence of the particular satisfaction of being genuinely pushed back on by someone who meant it. He thought about the bookshop more than he thought about the bar, which surprised him. The bar had been the significant thing, the charged thing, the encounter with consequence. But the bookshop had been something else. An ordinary evening, a conversation with no weight attached to it except the conversation itself. Two people standing among shelves talking about books and disagreeing about what they meant. He had walked out of that bookshop feeling more like himself than he had in months. He had not understood that at the time. He understood it now. He was not pining. He would not have described it as pining. He was not sitting at windows or writing in journals or doing any of the things that the word implied. He was simply aware of a gap. Specifically aware, in the way you are specifically aware of a thing that was shown to you once and then removed, so that what you miss is not abstract but precise. He knew exactly what the gap was the shape of. He just could not fill it. His oldest friend's girlfriend, a woman named Ruth, who was kind and observant and not afraid of directness, said to him at a gathering one spring evening, "You always look like you're checking whether someone's in the room." She said it lightly, without accusation. He did not ask her what she meant. He understood what she meant. The year moved. He was 35 in May. His friends organized something and he went and was genuinely glad of it, genuinely present for the evening, genuinely grateful for the people in his life who had stayed through the various versions of him. He was not unhappy. That was important and he knew it. Unhappy was too simple a word for what he was. What he was, he understood by the end of the year, was someone who had been shown something very specific about what he was capable of recognizing and failing to deserve. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that required ongoing grief, but in the quiet, persistent way of knowledge that does not go away, that sits in the background of everything, that makes you measure yourself against something you didn't know you were measuring against, until it was no longer in the room. Amara had told him the truth about himself without hating him for it. She had walked away without needing anything from him. And the combination of those two things, the truth and the walking away, had done something to him that no amount of ordinary living had undone. He healed, in the ordinary sense. He continued. He got better at the things she had named. He paid more attention to the difference she had pointed to, between being good with people and being good to them. He found, over time, that he was becoming someone slightly more worth being, not because of her specifically, but because the question she had asked had installed itself somewhere inside him, and refused to stop asking. But the wound she had left, if wound was even the right word, which he wasn't sure it was, that was not something that healed the same way. It did not require healing in the ordinary sense. It required something more like acknowledgement. The acknowledgement that you had stood across from someone who had acted from pure principle, who had given you something at real cost to herself, and then walked away without collecting anything for it, and that you had recognized it, and had not been ready for it, and that being not ready for something did not make it less real. He carried that, not as damage, as weight. There was a difference, and over time he learned to know the difference clearly. Some things don't want to be healed, they want to be held, and he held it. January arrived with the particular quality that January always had, a silence under everything, a sense of the year not yet knowing what it was going to become. Amara had always liked January for that reason, even though most people she knew found it difficult. The blankness of it felt to her like space rather than emptiness, like a room before the furniture arrives, where everything is still possible and nothing has been decided yet. She returned to her apartment in the second week of January. The process of returning was simpler than the process of leaving had been, in practical terms. Lena had found a room, through a friend of a friend, in a shared flat on the other side of the city that was affordable and not too far from her main clients. She had moved out on a Sunday with the same energy she had moved in, not dramatically, not with a lot of ceremony, but with a steadiness that Amara found quietly moving. She had cleaned the apartment before she left, not just tidied, cleaned. The kitchen was spotless. The bookshelves were exactly as Amara had left them, in the system only Amara understood. The east-facing window above the sink had been left open a crack, the way Amara always left it in the morning. When Amara walked back in, she stood in the middle of the apartment for a moment and simply felt the quality of the space. It was hers in a way it had not been for 3 months, and the returning of it was not as simple as it might have sounded, not just a matter of being in the right place again, but of being in it as herself, fully, without the quality of borrowedness that had characterized the room at Clara's building. She set her bag down. She walked to the kitchen. She put on the kettle. The weeks that followed were, in many ways, ordinary. She worked. She managed her logistics problems. She rebuilt her routines in the apartment the way she had always built them, methodically, without forcing them, allowing the days to settle back into the shape that worked. She went to the bookshop once a week now, which was more than she had gone before, and she told herself this was because she had been meaning to read more, and this was simply the implementation of that intention. She and Lena saw each other once a week, which was more than they had managed before the entire upheaval. There was something between them that had been altered by what had happened. Not repaired, because nothing had been broken, but deepened. The way a thing that has been tested has a different quality from a thing that has only been comfortable. They talked more freely. They disagreed more easily. The friendship had always been genuine, but it was now also seasoned in a way it had not been before. They spoke about Dominic occasionally, in the way you speak about someone who is no longer present, but whose passage through a period of your life left marks. Lena was clear-eyed about it. She had done the work of understanding what had happened, of naming the things she had not been able to name while she was inside them, of recognizing where she had lost track of herself, and understanding how it had happened. She was not bitter. Lena was not constitutionally built for bitterness, which was one of the things Amara had always admired most about her. She asked Amara, once, on an afternoon in February, whether she had thought about him. Amara said yes, occasionally. She said it simply, without elaboration, and Lena received it simply, without pursuing it further. That was the friendship now, spacious enough for that kind of honesty. What she did not tell Lena, and did not need to, was that the thinking she had done about Dominic over those months had taught her something about herself. Not about him. She had already known enough about him. About herself. Specifically about the relationship between the part of her that gave easily, instinctively, without calculating the return, and the part that still felt things. Those two parts were not in conflict, she understood now. They were the same part. The ability to give without condition, and the ability to feel fully, were not separate operations. They came from the same source. She had always thought of her giving as a kind of management, a way of redirecting the energy she might otherwise spend on her own needs, toward something more useful. She understood now that this was not entirely right. The giving was not a redirection. It was an expression, and the feeling she had carried about Dominic, which she had managed so carefully, and set aside so firmly, had also been an expression of the same thing, a genuine, uncalculated response to a genuine person, which she had not acted on, because acting on it would have cost something more important. She was not sorry she had managed it, she was glad, but she had also stopped pretending to herself that managing a feeling and not having it were the same thing. They were not, and acknowledging the difference was not weakness, it was simply accuracy. She thought about this on an evening in late February, when she was sitting by the east-facing window with a book, and the city outside was doing its usual evening thing, the light changing, the noise settling. She had a mug of tea. The plant that she had brought back from the rented room, the one that had found the narrow strip of light through Clara's brick wall window, was on the sill, and it was, she noted with satisfaction, doing considerably better with the east-facing light than it ever had before. It was almost too full for its pot now. She was going to need to find a bigger one. She sat in the window with her tea and her book, and felt the specific quality of a life that had returned to itself, not unchanged, but returned. She had given something away for 3 months, and come back to find it not less but more. She could not have predicted that. She had not gone into it expecting it. But that was the thing about giving without condition. You could not predict what it gave back. Sometimes it gave back nothing at all. Sometimes it gave back exactly what you needed in a form you had not known to ask for. She was not going to build a philosophy from that. She was too practical for philosophies. But she held it as a true thing, observed from the inside, which was the only kind of knowledge she had ever entirely trusted. Across the city, Lena was in her new room, probably working on something that was going well, or not going well but that she was working on anyway, which was how Lena always worked. Somewhere further across the city, Dominic was living a life that Amara had no window into, and no longer needed one into, doing whatever it was that he did in the evenings, carrying whatever the conversation in the bar had left him with. She thought about him once more that evening, and then she went back to her book, and the thought passed like most thoughts do, not resolved exactly, but completed in some sense she could not fully articulate, like a sentence that ends not with the word you expected, but with one that is somehow correct anyway. She read until the light faded. Then she got up and made dinner, and called her father, who talked for 40 minutes about a book he had been reading, about the history of maps, which she found, to her genuine surprise, entirely absorbing. She told him about the logistics problem she had solved that week. He told her it sounded like the kind of problem that would have made a good exam question. She agreed that it probably would have. She said goodnight. She washed up. She stood at the east-facing window for a moment before bed, looking at the city, which was doing what it always did at that hour. Not sleeping, never fully sleeping, but becoming quieter, more interior, turning inward, towards something that would not be visible until morning. She was 31 years old. She had given away her apartment and gotten it back. She had said a hard thing to a near stranger in a quiet bar. She had walked away clean from something that had wanted to hold her, and she had done it not because she was cold or because she felt nothing, but because some things mattered more than feeling, and she knew what those things were. She was going to be fine. She was, in fact, already fine. She had been fine for a while now without quite letting herself notice it. She turned off the light. She went to bed. The city breathed around her, and the apartment breathed around her, and everything was, for now, in the right place. Tomorrow there would be more problems to solve. There always were. She would get up in the morning and make coffee by the east-facing window and go to work and come home and do it again. The days would continue, because days always continued, which was the one thing you could count on them to do. And somewhere in the distance, not in her sight but real nonetheless, a man named Dominic was still sitting with something he had been given and could not put down, a weight he had not asked for, a standard he could not stop measuring himself against, a conversation that had lasted 40 minutes in a quiet bar and somehow changed the interior landscape of everything that came after. He would not know how to say what he was carrying. He would not, for a very long time, have the words for it. But it would be there, in the way that certain things are there. Not loudly, not constantly, but at the edges of things, at the end of evenings, in the space between what he expected from people and what he got. In every room he walked into looking for something he could not name, because the only time he had seen it clearly, it had been walking out the door. He never healed from it, not entirely. Not because healing was impossible, but because some things don't want to be healed. They want to be learned from, slowly, over years, in the specific silence that follows a moment when someone held a mirror up and showed you who you could have been worthy of, and you watched them choose themselves instead. That was his to carry. Amara's lamp went out at 10:30 on a February night. The city kept its lights on a while longer. The plant on the east-facing windowsill leaned, very slightly, toward the direction of the morning it was already beginning to wait for. Everything in its right place. Everything. Exactly as it should be.